Welcome to our exploration of the war on meat, a real solution or just a political power play. In this video, we'll delve into the multifaceted issues surrounding meat consumption, from its significant environmental impact to the health risks linked with red meat. We'll also examine the rise of plant-based alternatives and the cultural significance of meat in global culinary practices. As we navigate the economic dependencies and corporate influences at play, we'll question whether the push against meat is genuinely about sustainability or if it's simply a battleground for political agendas. Join us as we unpack the complexities of this contentious debate. 1. Environmental impact. A heavy carbon footprint. The livestock sector is a significant contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions, accounting for approximately 14.5% of the total emissions worldwide. This figure is comparable to the transportation sector, underscoring the environmental impact of meat production. The carbon footprint of livestock is primarily due to methane emissions from cattle digestion and the nitrous oxide released from manure. As climate change becomes an urgent global issue, the environmental impact of meat consumption is increasingly scrutinized. Reducing meat intake could be a step toward mitigating climate change, but it also raises questions about the feasibility and fairness of implementing such changes on a global scale. 2. Land use. The strain on Earth's resources. Meat production demands extensive land use, with beef production alone consuming 60% of agricultural land while contributing only 2% of the global calorie supply. This disparity highlights the inefficiency of land use in meat production compared to plant-based agriculture. The vast areas dedicated to livestock grazing and feed crops contribute to deforestation, biodiversity loss, and soil degradation. Critics argue that the land could be more efficiently used for growing crops that directly feed humans, thereby reducing environmental degradation. However, shifting agricultural practices on this scale would require significant changes in global food systems, posing challenges to farmers and economies dependent on livestock. 3. Water consumption. A thirsty industry. The water consumption associated with meat production is staggering, with 1 pound of beef requiring about 1,800 gallons of water. This highlights the inefficiency of meat production in terms of water usage compared to plant-based foods. As water scarcity becomes a growing concern in many parts of the world, the high water footprint of meat production is increasingly seen as unsustainable. Transitioning to diets with lower meat consumption could alleviate some of the pressure on water resources. However, achieving this transition involves overcoming cultural and economic barriers, as meat remains a staple in many diets worldwide. 4. Health risks. Red meat under the microscope. Excessive consumption of red and processed meats has been linked to increased risks of various health issues, including heart disease, colorectal cancer, and type 2 diabetes. These health concerns have led to calls for reduced meat consumption as part of a balanced diet. Public health campaigns and dietary guidelines often advocate for increased intake of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains while moderating meat consumption. However, dietary habits are deeply ingrained and influenced by cultural and economic factors, making widespread changes challenging. Balancing health recommendations with individual preferences and cultural traditions remains a critical aspect of this debate. 5. Plant-based alternatives. The rise of new markets. The plant-based food market is rapidly expanding, with companies like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods leading the charge. This market is expected to surpass $34 billion by 2030, indicating growing consumer interest in plant-based alternatives. These products aim to mimic the taste and texture of meat while offering a more sustainable and health-conscious option. The rise of plant-based alternatives reflects a shift in consumer preferences, driven by environmental and health concerns. However, questions about the nutritional value and processing of these products persist, and the potential for corporate monopolization in the food sector is a concern for some critics. 6. Cultural significance. A global perspective. Meat holds significant cultural and traditional importance worldwide, from family meals to religious ceremonies. Efforts to reduce meat consumption are often controversial, as they challenge long-standing cultural practices and values. In many cultures, meat is not just a source of nutrition but a symbol of hospitality, celebration, and identity. Reducing meat consumption must be approached with sensitivity to cultural contexts to avoid alienating communities and individuals. Striking a balance between promoting sustainable diets and respecting cultural traditions is a delicate task that requires thoughtful dialogue and collaboration. 7. Economic dependency. Livelihoods at stake. The meat industry employs hundreds of millions globally, particularly in rural areas where livestock farming is a primary source of income. The economic dependency on meat production poses challenges to efforts aimed at reducing meat consumption. Any significant shifts in dietary patterns could have profound implications for livelihoods, especially in regions where alternative employment opportunities are scarce. Policymakers must consider the economic impact of transitioning to more sustainable diets and support affected communities through education, training, and investment in alternative industries. Balancing environmental and health goals with economic stability is a critical aspect of this complex issue. 8. Corporate influence. The role of big business. Critics argue that the rise of plant-based and lab-grown meat is heavily driven by corporate interests, potentially leading to monopolization in the food sector. The involvement of large corporations in the plant-based market raises concerns about the concentration of power and influence in the food industry. While these companies contribute to innovation and accessibility, there is a risk that small-scale producers could be marginalized. Ensuring fair competition and supporting diverse food systems are essential to preventing monopolization and promoting equitable access to sustainable food options. 9. Policy shifts. Governmental intervention. Governments in some countries have introduced measures such as taxes on meat or subsidies for plant-based products, sparking debates about personal choice versus public good. These policy shifts reflect growing recognition of the environmental and health impacts of meat consumption. However, they also raise questions about government intervention in personal dietary choices and the potential for unintended consequences. Engaging stakeholders from various sectors and considering diverse perspectives is crucial in developing effective and equitable policies that balance individual freedoms with collective well-being. 10. Sustainability advocacy. Embracing balanced diet. Environmental groups advocate for adopting sustainable diets, such as the Mediterranean or flexitarian diet, which emphasize plant-based foods while allowing moderate meat consumption. These diets offer a balanced approach to nutrition, health, and sustainability, aligning with both individual preferences and environmental goals. Promoting dietary diversity and moderation can help bridge the gap between advocating for reduced meat consumption and respecting cultural and personal choices. Encouraging awareness and education about the benefits of sustainable diets is key to fostering informed and empowered consumers who can make choices that align with their values and circumstances.